Mhm.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allie Parkinson, and I am here with Becky. And for the next short amount of time here, we're going to walk you through some background on Smarter Balanced with the theme of Trumped. I'm going to turn things over to Becky, and we're going to get started.
I know we're all kind of thinking about vacation coming right around the corner here, and maybe you might be in a card game or two. And there's my ace of spades. I think I have the trick until hearts comes and trumps my trick and takes it away. This session is on how and how not to prepare students for the new test, Smarter Balanced Assessment. So, we are now being very deliberate in defining the type of PD that each of our sessions are. And so for today, we know that we can have a phase 1, which is a building level. Phase 3, you're taking it well into practice. By phase 5, all kids in your classroom, that would be like a 4 in Marzano. All kids in your classroom would be successful. So today we're looking at getting ready, that question of how do I get ready for Smarter Balance at really a building knowledge level. Okay, you will see that we're going to try to be very explicit about the good instruction that students need systematically. Wouldn't it be nice if every year you would get kids with a good background because things are taught systematically and they come in knowing, and you're able to teach your grade level content. There will be a number of turn and talks in here where we're hoping that it takes you to start thinking about knowing what is important to how would that look in your classroom? How would that change your instruction? So all of Smarter Balance, all of what we're doing in our schools right now is about raising student achievement. And certainly that is what Common Core is about. We know that Common Core is talking about kids being able to perform at increased proficiency levels than we're used to. They can think with increased complexity, and they can do all of that independently. So let's look at Smarter Balance. Here's an assessment question from the 4th grade. The kids were doing a research report, and the task shows the passage that they were reading, and then the note taking that occurred as they were reading to prepare for this research. So here's the question. A student is writing a research report. The student took notes. Click on the box to show the best main idea that each note supports. Well, you know, for some kids that are like not really confident, they're not going to read that whole thing. It's too long. They say that the shortest passage in Smarter Balance is 550 words at 3rd grade. It's very frequent that the first thing that teachers notice when they go on the practice tests is the passages are long. They're much longer than what kids have been expected to handle before. So somebody, some child that's not very confident, he'll think, oh, this is, you know, too hard, but he'll make a guess at that main idea question the best he can. And then there's kids that really their reading rate is so slow they don't even get to the passage, but they do click one of the answers on the main idea question. Some kids, they're going to try to read that passage very hard, but their decoding skills are so limited that they can't get enough words to put together a main idea. And so they just click on one of the answers. Some kids have great decoding, but their vocabulary background is very weak. If you don't know the meanings of the words, how can you put the main idea together? There's some kids, actually, they can fluently decode. They have the vocabulary. But gosh, the answer is embedded in a very complex syntax, sentence structure. and they cannot decipher that main idea from that complex syntax. There are other kids that, man, they've been working so hard, and now there's so many synonyms and pronouns, they don't even know what it is anymore. And so they don't get the main idea question because of a cohesion problem. Difficult vocabulary, multisyllabic words, sentence structures that are complex and long, lengthy passages, pronouns, synonyms, all of these are characteristics of complex text. When we're trying to help kids navigate complex text, these are the concepts that we focus on. And we know we have a fair amount of kids in Grand Forks that are drowning in complex text. Common Core has warned us about complex text right from the beginning. This is Lucy Calkins' ladder of the Common Core reading standards. And out of the 10 standards, she told us right up front that the close reading, the going back into the text, finding the author's words of complex texts are the two most important reading standards. And they are going to be foundational to every one of the other reading standards.
And when you look at this slide, obviously we've visited this slide many, many times. You know, a couple years ago, we focused on close reading. And I know that teachers that continue to prioritize this in their planning and their intentional teaching every day, what you are really doing is preparing your students to be successful on the Smarter Balanced Assessment, because that is key to many of the questions, as we will learn more about some of the other examples of questions.
So we know, in addition to complex texts, the skills are important. The comprehension skills are very important. When kids are very young, we start talking about the main idea and what are the supporting details. And really, that skill goes all the way up into very complex texts. The problem is when kids are assessed, let's say 3rd grade, at the end of the year, you're going to be assessed on Smarter Balance here. The kids are going to be assessed on main idea at a text complexity of P. Okay, so, you know, kids may be able to go down to H, and they do know main idea and supporting details, but they might not be able to show it at level P because that level is still too complex for them, and they're not fluent at that level yet. So Tim Shanahan has written this article on how to and how not to prepare our students for Smarter Balance. He says that text complexity trumps main idea. Text complexity trumps all isolated skills. So they may know how to do that, thinking of that skill at an earlier level. It's just they can't do it in complex text. I'm going to ask you now to take a piece of paper out, and if I had Post-it notes, I'd give them to you. But just from the first part of this presentation, the content, can you write 3 key words that you've heard in this message today? So key words or important ideas, 3 of them.
We'll take a moment and pause this recording to allow you to do that.
I'd like you now to turn and talk. Share your key ideas or words with a partner and compare. You might agree, you might disagree, you might change your mind. And lastly, I want you to circle the 3 words that you've decided on, and I want you to write a summary statement of what we've talked about this far in this presentation. And I'll pause. So going back to the ladder, where we know that kids are going to be asked to go back into text and find the evidence for a conclusion or support, we're going to kids are going to be asked to read lengthier passages, complex passages, and that's where their reading comprehension will be assessed on. Let's look at just the other segments of this ladder. We know the bottom standards are about key ideas and details. So main ideas and details. Standard 2 and 3, we know that the middle of the ladder talks about author's craft and the structure of the text. And then we know the top of the reading ladder, again, is between texts. Can kids read from multiple sources and integrate knowledge and ideas? So let's look at a couple test questions. Here's one. See where it is on the ladder. Click on the sentence that gives the best conclusion about people who make maple syrup. Click on 2 sentences from the passage that best support that answer. Now, we're asking, that question is asking the reader to draw a conclusion, which is putting the parts together. That would be using key ideas and details. But the second part where it says click on 2 sentences from the passage that best support the answer, well, there's no multiple choice for that. That means that the student has to go back into that entire passage, and out of all of those sentences, they have to click on the 2 sentences that best support that answer. That hugely is an example of close reading. One of the differences with Smarter Balance is that they don't give you 4 multiple choice answers to pick from. They give you 550 words to pick from. This is more difficult. So when we look at key ideas, we know the kids have to be able to summarize text. They have to connect the parts, and they have to be able to infer a central idea or theme and trace that across the text. Here's another question. Which sentence best describes the lesson of the passage? Actually, that's a theme question. We've always asked, what is the theme? This would say, which sentence best describes the lesson of the passage? That could be a choice of 6 in a multiple choice question, or it could be going back to that entire passage, and you have to highlight the sentence that best describes the passage. This is difficult. Which sentence from the passage best supports your answer? Okay, that's main idea and supporting details. That's all taught down on the bottom of the ladder. And then lastly, click the 2 details that best support this conclusion. So we're looking for kids to summarize. We're looking for kids to be able to find the supporting details. All of this is fundamental skill at the bottom of the ladder where it's the easiest.
As we continue to read through many of these Smarter Balanced questions, you'll quickly see that it really is no longer about memorizing a test question. It's about teaching our kids to be critical thinkers and to be able to analyze the text and to dig deeper. And so those are the parts that we hope that's emphasized as we continue to talk with you about how we can dig deeper into text to prepare them in that way.
So we go to the middle of the ladder where we focus on vocabulary, the structure of the text, and point of view or author's purpose. Again, these are familiar to us. Here's one of the test questions. It says choose 2 sentences, and here it is, multiple choice. Choose 2 sentences from the student's notes that add the best reasons for the underlined sentence to support the writer's opinion about cursive writing. So very definitely we're talking about the point of view here in that question. Choose the sentence that best describes what information in the paragraph shows about the author's point of view. Again, which 2 sentences from the passage? They have to go back, highlight which 2 sentences best support your answer. No, excuse me, that was multiple choice. Here's a vocabulary question. We've always had these kind of questions, even back in the old days, where the vocabulary word was always embedded in a sentence. So they're really asking about the word meaning in the sentence, okay? And again, what does the word jumble mostly mean? Okay, but they mostly mean in this sentence, which sometimes throws students. The top of the ladder is where they're reading across texts, and They could be doing that to make a claim and then supporting that with evidence or comparing and contrasting themes. This question, I think, is from, it's a 4th or 5th grade passage where they were talking, they had 2 different passages about the kinds of work that astronauts do. So here's the question. Explain why which resource would most likely have the most useful information about the kind of work astronauts do while in space. Support your explanation with 2 details from the source. And that means they're going back and highlighting. So, what have you noticed as you think about the Smarter Balanced Assessment questions and Calkins ladder of the Common Core reading standards? I will pause so that you can turn and talk. Tim Shanahan actually answers this question about how to and how not to prepare students for the new tests with this central message. He says, prepare students to excel on these tests, not by focusing instruction on question types, but by making students sophisticated and powerful readers. He gives us 5 lifesavers, 5 strategies to help kids be more sophisticated and powerful and therefore ready for this level of demand. The first is, he says, have students read extensively within instruction. In other words, that would be where you may be meeting with that guided group. You set a purpose. Students go away from the group with a question in their reader's log that they are going to read, answer, find evidence from the text. They know you're going to call them back in about 20 minutes. They will read right during in that reading class. And you are going to hold them accountable for the comprehension of what they've just read. We know that kids, to rely on them going home and getting enough reading there, it doesn't work in every situation anymore. These reading tests are testing kids' ability to read. And so our instruction has to help them to develop that ability to read. So Shanahan is saying to have them do that within the instruction. Secondly, he talks about students reading increased amounts of text without guidance or support. And what he means by this is that in guided group, a teacher is going to be very conscious about kids being successful in comprehending. And so the teacher will pick a chunk of text and stop the kids after that amount of time and might question and monitor their comprehension. They will converse. She might stick in a teaching point there. What he really means is that the problem is when teachers always have a short passage that kids are responsible for, and that we don't work to extend that. So that, maybe in the beginning of the year you read to the end of the page and check comprehension, but in 2 months you're able to go to the 3rd page. We eventually want kids to be able to at least go through 550 words. Actually, that would be the shortest. We want them to be able to read more than that on their own and be able to monitor their own comprehension. Shanahan says that, when you're taking a test, it's more like a monologue, not a dialogue. There's nobody there to check on you and talk with you and support you. It's just you dealing with that text alone. The 3rd suggestion is about making sure that kids get text that's rich and sufficiently challenging. We've got a lot of kids that, we worry about how successful their self-efficacy and their reading a lot of easy reading. We know they need that. We know that they need to be working in their zone of proximal development where they have that teacher supporting them. But we also now know with Common Core that kids need a sufficient diet of dealing with complex text in a guided setting, but also alone. So kids have to have some time working in complex text on their own. Shanahan would say that some of our students are, they're in the shallow water all the time, and we have to give them experience in the complex text as well.
When I think about his recommendation for this one, it just reminds us all of the important need for us to know our readers in all book levels, what their easy level would look like, what their hard level would look like, what their just right, and then plan intentionally throughout the day when they need fluency work and when they need to work in a more complex text to look at a more complicated sentence structure. And so that variety is really, really important for us to really know our readers in our classrooms.
So what I want you to do is to think back on these first 3 recommendations that focus on the student's reading. Can you fill in the summary statement for each of these? Turn and talk to get help. I will pause. Now discuss how you can apply these steps in your classroom. I will pause. I'm going to back up the bus a little bit to the very beginning of the year to lay a foundation for Shanahan's 4th recommendation. Actually, he's going back to speaking and listening where we started at the very beginning. We know that the listening skills have to do with comprehension and collaboration, and speaking is then about the presentation. But we're basically just going to focus in on the listening aspect today, and basically standard number 2, which is a critical standard for all literacy learning. And standard number 2 talks about listening. We know this is what develops first with kids. We know that the listener has to quiet himself inside and out. They have to be focused, and they do all of this for the purpose of comprehending. The language of learning gives 4 listening skills of increased rigor. In the end, with the hope that kids are going to develop comprehension. Now, these 2 skills are specifically stated: paraphrasing and summarizing. We know those as skills that we use in reading and in writing, but they are first taught in listening. Speaking follows, where we know that we try to choose the right words with the right delivery. Again, here are the 4 increasingly complex strategies that we can do with kids with the goal of speaking with clarity. And the skills that come out of that is being able to make relevant comments, the child's ability to choose the right words that give those shades of meaning, incomplete sentences, complete thoughts, so the reader isn't dangling or the listener isn't wondering what's going on. Asking and answering questions, a very huge part of speaking and listening. And again, with the idea that we want kids eventually to be able to give high quality answers. Do they know different kinds of questions? Can they provide complete and concise answers? These are important skills that begin in speaking and listening. And lastly, in terms of crafting the argument, we want to persuade. That's the whole goal, and present the evidence. And the skills involved there are the use of main idea and supporting details, retelling, logically sequencing ideas in a presentation, and giving evidence for that argument. The speaking and listening skills are very important core Common Core skills, actually. Lester Lamanek also helps us to identify what's core in instruction. And he very clearly has said that our first learning is through the ear, orally. When kids understand through speaking and listening, then they're able to show comprehension when we ask them to learn through their eye, and eventually to be able to produce it in writing. Lamanek says this sequence matters if you want ease and naturalness in learning to read and write. So everything starts through speaking and listening, and then it moves into reading, and lastly into writing. Our K-5 Literacy Committee has been working on writing, and one of the topics that comes up over and over is really Common Core Writing Standard number 8. Our kids can find relevant information in both print and digital resources. That's not too difficult. They're able to assess credibility and accuracy of the sources. That's pretty good. But the one that's difficult is integrating that information while avoiding plagiarism. Why? Because our kids can't paraphrase very well and they can't summarize very well. Both of those are key skills to avoiding paraphrasing. Well, when we look at where they're taught, they start here in kindergarten with asking and answering questions about key details, and that moves also into first grade, asking and answering questions. In second grade, we're asking them to retell or to recount or describe key ideas or details. Third grade, this is where we're asking them to master main idea and supporting details. Fourth grade, they should have mastery of paraphrasing, and fifth grade, mastery of summarizing. So paraphrasing and summarizing are taught in the speaking and listening standards, anchor number 2. We know that when kids are reading on these tests, they have to be able to identify that central idea or theme. They're able to do that pretty well, I think. But for their ability to go back in that text and be able to identify the best sentence that supports that main idea, is that the close reading portion of it, the evidence portion, is difficult. So we know kids have to be able to identify main idea and supporting details in the text by close reading it. They have to be able to determine the importance in the text. And again, where is this taught? Anchor standard number 2 in speaking and listening. So we know the what of anchor number 2. It's about asking and answering questions. It's about retelling. It's about determining main idea and supporting details, about paraphrasing and summarizing. Let's now look at the how. In each of the learning areas, we do it through a text read aloud or information presented in diverse media or formats. So the remainder of this presentation is going to look at classroom strategies from a non-digital standpoint and from a digital standpoint. Because the fourth lifesaver that Shanahan gives us is that kids need lots of practice at explaining their answers. Okay? And so we know the skills from speaking and listening that they need to be working on. And through those, kids will get a lot of opportunity to explain their answers. So he starts with the skill of asking and answering questions. As you're reading, doing an interactive reading or a model, or even a read aloud, to even pause and together think about what was the most interesting sentence that the author said, and teaching kids how you would write questions from that interesting sentence. So they get practice at asking and answering questions. Retelling. is another skill that's important. And this is a scaffold that actually we've made on cardstock for you today. And kids use this in guided reading where they each pick a card and they start their portion of the group retell with the words that are on their card. Now, eventually what happens when kids get used to doing this is that they will pretty soon memorize these transition words, and they'll be able to orally, independently retell a story, and even be able to independently write a retelling of a story. Main idea in supporting details is the third grade mastery target. Here, just asking kids to stop and think about what's the most important sentence that the author has said so far, and then give them time to discuss why is that important. Determining importance is not easy for all students, and these kind of strategies are going to help you to see who needs extra work, and really what level your kids are functioning at, because we know these skills build from easy to hard. Asking and answering questions is the easiest level of determining importance. Main idea is third grade. Fourth grade is paraphrasing. So helping kids to learn how to do that. And actually, fourth grade is where paraphrase is mastered. We teach that many years before we expect mastery. So getting kids used to that routine of, stop reading, cover the text, ask yourself, what did I read? And then retell in your own words.
And I think you raised a good point. While this is a skill that's assessed in fourth grade, it takes many years of practicing this skill in different ways at different grade levels. And so that is kind of the reason why we have multiple grades watching this today, so that you can take away, what does this look like in my grade, even though this might be a fourth grade skill that's assessed.
That's good point. And also, you'll notice on your handouts, you have some of these supports that you can take with you, some of these scaffolds. And then lastly, the most difficult, summarizing, is a very difficult skill. It's not only asking the child to determine what's most important, but they have to do it concisely. They have to do it clearly in a very small context. So, that beginning activity where we started with the keywords, what would be the most important words, and then giving kids some turn and talk, some time where they can really explain and defend their answers would help them then to write a summary statement using those words. So Shanahan says this speaking and listening standards are helpful in having kids explain their answers and then providing text evidence to support their claims. This is one of the questions actually on Smarter Balanced. You have to listen to this presentation. You click on it, it's about 3 to 4 minutes long, and it's just listening. You see no text. And then you answer questions based on this presentation that you just listened to. So speaking and listening is even assessed on Smarter Balance. When we're asking kids to be able to provide the evidence for their claim, this support refute organizer, you saw this a number of years ago, but I think now it has more meaning for all of us. Say, for example, you're reading a fiction story and you're talking about the character traits, the main character. Somebody says, well, he was a real weasel. For kids to have to then, in their discussion, go back and find in the text the author's words, the exact words that would be evidence for that claim, or evidence for that claim, or evidence against that claim. You can do it with retellings. You can do it when kids are predicting. Maybe you're building background on the Mississippi Indians. You're going to be reading this in social studies, and you're asking kids what they know about the Mississippi Indians. You're watching a documentary on the Mississippi Indians, and then you start making predictions about what you're going to read about. Again, once you get to the reading level, making kids do that close reading where they go back, they find the author's words as evidence for that prediction and evidence against that prediction. This is the best big bang for your buck graphic organizer that I can think of for providing evidence for your claims. Owaki has in her Common Core writing book some words to express opinions. We're going to be getting into this actually with argument, but I've made copies of this, and I kind of use this as a go-to for ways that I can make statements about topics or issues, maybe from social studies or science, or the characters in fiction, or just, you know, if I said, wow, that book was a real page turner, what would be the evidence for that perspective? What would be the evidence against that perspective? So it's just a resource to help me. Shanahan's last lifesaver is that he recommends that we engage students in writing about text, just lots of writing about text, not just in replying to multiple choice questions. Here's an example. This is actually 3rd grade. The question is, what inference can be made about the author's message about animals? Include the information from the passage to support your answer. Here's your choices. That kind of took away my breath, actually, when I first saw this, because there are no choices. This is a difficult question. It's an open response question. This is one from 5th grade. In 1 or 2 paragraphs, write an ending to the story that follows from the events and experience in the story. And again, nothing to pick from.
When you look at these questions, you realize how that is connected with our message this year, as we've tried to encourage teachers to prioritize writing every day, prioritize responses to writing as a heavy part of your day. You know, those students that have been given that time throughout this school year to write every day may not be as intimidated by those questions as students that have not been given that opportunity to write often. And then they see a question like that. That might be intimidating for some.
You can really see in these kind of questions how all of it comes together, all the speaking and listening come together, where they get the practice at choosing precise words through speaking and listening, completing sentences. You know, they're able to ask and answer different kinds of questions completely and concisely. They are able to deal with main idea and supporting details. They can retell, they can logically sequence to provide the evidence for a claim. All of this just comes together as you look at some of these questions. So Vygotsky, a long time ago, made very clear that speaking and listening is very core because it gives kids frames for thinking on their own. Lester Lamanek would say speaking and listening is core because it's the foundation for natural reading and writing. And so if we want to ensure success as readers and writers, we make sure that kids are given opportunities to speak and listen. So I want you to do a think aloud. At the very end here, you have some colored index cards somewhere around your workspace here. I want you to synthesize into one word. What is your biggest takeaway from this session? And we'll pause the tape.
As we finish up today, I hope that you are leaving with the message that we really want you to be teaching kids to be thinkers. We want you to be teaching kids to have an opinion, to be articulate in their views, to be defending their reading and writing responses. You know, that is how we want students to be preparing for the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And your intentional teaching is really key to supporting students in this assessment. But most importantly, it is most importantly that you are preparing these students for really getting students ready for life. These skills that are the message from this last hour is really preparing our kids for life, not just a test. The test is coming. We have to prepare for that. But most importantly, this is best practice about preparing kids for life. We're going to end there, and I thank you for joining, Becky and I, and we'll sign off for now. Thanks, everybody.